Ezekiel Marshall, 74, sat on his Memphis porch, iced tea sweating in his grip, watching kids chase a ball under the July sun. Tires squealed. 2 squad cars screeched up, cops bursting out, guns aimed, barking, "Down, now!" Zeke, baffled, dropped slow, knee creaking, as neighbors gawked. "Thought you'd slip by, old man," one sneered. Zeke fumbled his phone, dialed, rasped, "Tamara." Voicemail clicked. "Deputy Attorney General Tamara Marshall." Cops froze. His quiet life was done. What had he stumbled into? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, hit that like and subscribe button, because tomorrow's wild episode is one you can't miss. Ezekiel Marshall's chest pressed against the warped planks of his porch. The iced tea glass shattered beside him, its contents pooling into the cracks like spilled blood under the Memphis sun. His knee throbbed, an old injury from marching, in 63 flaring up as the shouts of the cops hammered his ears. Sergeant Victor Grayson loomed over him, a 48-year-old slab of muscle with a buzz cut so sharp it could slice paper, his uniform stretched tight across a frame, built for intimidation. Sweat beaded on Grayson's forehead, not from the 90-degree heat but from the thrill of power, his pale eyes glinting as he barked, "ID now!" Zeke's fingers twitched toward his pocket, but he stopped, lifting his head just enough to squint at the man. "What's this about?" he asked, voice steady despite the pistol barrels hovering inches from his skull. Grayson's lip curled, a sneer twisting his face as he stepped closer, boots crunching glass into dust. "Got a tip. Robbery suspect. Black male, elderly, fits you perfect." The words dripped with mockery, each syllable a jab at Zeke's existence. Across the street, kids froze mid-game, their ball rolling into the gutter, forgotten as neighbors peeked through blinds or lingered on stoops, phones trembling in their hands. Zeke's gaze flicked to his slippers, soft leather scuffed from years of quiet walks, then back to Grayson. "Robbery? In these?" he said, tilting his foot slightly, the absurdity hanging thick in the air. The second cop, a wiry figure with a patchy beard, shifted uneasily, his gun dipping a fraction, but Grayson didn't flinch. "Don't get smart," he snapped, his meaty hand darting out to seize Zeke's collar. Before Zeke could brace himself, Grayson yanked him up and slammed him against the porch railing, the wood groaning under the impact. Pain lanced through Zeke's ribs, and a warm trickle slid from his lip, coppery and sharp on his tongue as he tasted blood. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath rippling through the humid afternoon, but no one moved closer, fear rooting them in place. Jamal, a skinny 17-year-old from 3 houses down, bolted from his stoop, his phone thrust out like a shield, camera rolling. "This is live, man, you can't do that," he shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of defiance and terror. His braids swung as he edged nearer, sneakers slapping the pavement, capturing every second of Grayson's fist tightening on Zeke's shirt. The sergeant's head whipped around, eyes narrowing into slits as he released Zeke and lunged at the boy. "Give me that!" Grayson roared, snatching the phone from Jamal's grip with a swipe so fast it blurred. The teen stumbled back, hands raised, but Grayson didn't hesitate. He smashed the device onto the concrete, stomping it once, twice, until the screen splintered into a web of cracks, the red light of the live feed blinking out. Jamal's mouth opened, a protest dying in his throat as Grayson towered over him, daring him to speak. "Next time it's you," the cop growled, kicking the wreckage into the grass. Zeke steadied himself against the railing, wiping his lip with the back of his hand, the smear of crimson stark against his weathered skin. His heart thumped, not from fear, but from a simmering rage he hadn't felt since the days of dogs and hoses. "You got no cause," he said, locking eyes with Grayson, his tone low, deliberate, the kind of calm that carried weight. The sergeant pivoted back, his bulk casting a shadow over Zeke, the gun still clutched in one hand, finger hovering near the trigger. "Cause? I got a call. That's all I need," Grayson spat, his voice thick with contempt. He motioned to the wiry cop, who finally holstered his weapon, stepping forward with a pair of cuffs dangling from his belt. "Hands out, old man. We're taking a ride." Zeke's jaw tightened, his mind racing through decades of lessons, his father's. voice echoing in his skull, "Keep cool, stay alive." He extended his wrists, the metal clicking shut around them, cold and biting, as Grayson shoved him toward the squad car. The street buzzed now, a low hum of whispers and rustling as more phones emerged, lenses glinting in the sunlight like tiny eyes bearing witness. A woman in a yellow sundress clutched her toddler's hand, her face a mask of disbelief, while an old man with a cane shook his head, muttering curses under his breath. Zeke caught their stares as he stumbled down the steps, Grayson's grip bruising his arm, the cop's knuckles white with exertion. "Suspicious, huh?" Zeke muttered, loud enough for the crowd to hear, his eyes sweeping over his khaki pants, his faded polo, the slippers that barely clung to his feet. Suspicious of what? Breathing? Grayson's laugh was a harsh bark, echoing off the brick houses. "Keep talking. Makes my day easier," he said, slamming the car door shut after. Shoving Zeke into the back seat, the vinyl sticky against his skin. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of sweat and cheap cologne. The radio crackling with static as Grayson slid behind the wheel. The wiry cop rode shotgun, glancing back at Zeke through the rearview mirror, his Adam's apple bobbing like he wanted to say something but didn't dare. "You're making a mistake," Zeke said, leaning forward slightly, his cuffs clinking against the seat. Grayson didn't turn, just smirked at the windshield. "Mistake's yours, thinking you're special." The engine roared to life, tires, peeling out as the car lurched forward, leaving the shattered phone and the stunned crowd in its wake. Zeke's gaze drifted to the window, watching his street blur past, the familiar porches and sagging trees fading into a smear of green and brown. He'd lived here 40 years, raised a daughter, buried a wife, paid taxes on time, and still here he was, a suspect for existing. The ride was short, 10 minutes tops, but every second stretched, heavy with the weight of what was unfolding. The station loomed ahead, a squat concrete block with flickering lights, and Grayson hauled Zeke out, dragging him through the double doors like a trophy. Inside, the air buzzed with the clatter of keyboards and the murmur of voices, officers, glancing up then away, avoiding Zeke's eyes as if he were contagious. Grayson shoved him toward a desk, barking at a clerk to process him. "Resisting arrest," he said, loud enough for the room to hear, his tone daring anyone to question it. Zeke stood still, shoulders squared, as fingerprints stained his hands. Black, the ink cold against his skin. "I didn't resist," he said, meeting Grayson's glare. "You know that." The sergeant leaned in close, breath hot with coffee and spite. "I know what I say you did," he hissed, before stepping back with a grin that promised more to come. The booking room was a blur, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A young woman with a clipboard asking rote questions Zeke answered with clipped precision. Name, age, address. 74 years old, he thought, and still proving I belong. Grayson lingered nearby, arms crossed, watching like a hawk circling prey, his presence a constant threat. When they shoved Zeke into a holding cell, the clang of the bars rang in his ears, a sound he'd heard in stories from his youth but never lived until now. He sank onto the bench, the concrete chilling his bones, and pulled out his phone, the one thing they hadn't taken yet. His thumb hovered over Tamara's number, the lifeline he'd clung to on the porch. He pressed it, the ring cutting through. The silence, and waited, knowing this was just the start of a fight he hadn't asked for but couldn't avoid. Outside, the crowd on his street hadn't dispersed. Phones stayed up, videos uploading, whispers turning to shouts as Jamal's broken device became a rallying cry. "They smashed it!" a woman yelled, her voice carrying over the hum of cicadas. "That's evidence!" Another man, grey hair, poking from a baseball cap, nodded grimly. "Same old story. Pick a black man, any black man." The footage spread, shaky clips of Grayson's shove, Zeke's bloodied lip, the sneer that said he enjoyed it. On the porch, the iced tea puddle dried into a sticky stain, a quiet testament to the peace that had been stolen. Zeke didn't know, sight yet sitting in that cell, but the world was starting to watch, and Grayson's smirk was about to cost him more than he could imagine. For now, though, Zeke sat alone, the cuffs gone, but the weight of them lingering, his mind already turning. to the next move in a game he'd played too many times before. Ezekiel Marshall slumped on the holding cell's bench, the concrete seeping cold through his thin polo, his wrists still tingling where the cuffs had bitten into his skin. The Memphis station buzzed around him, a hive of clacking keys, and barked orders, but inside this steel cage time crawled, each tick of the clock a reminder of the absurdity that landed him here. 74 years old, a lifetime of dues paid, and now this. Booked for resisting arrest by a man who'd split, his lip for daring to question a lie. His phone rested in his palm, screen dim but alive, a lifeline he hadn't used since the porch. He swiped to Tamara's name, his daughter's voice the only thing that could cut through this mess, and pressed call. 1 ring. 2. Then her sharp, familiar tone broke through. "Dad, where are you?" Zeke exhaled, the knot in his chest loosening just a fraction. "Police station. Downtown. They're saying I resisted," he said, keeping his voice low, eyes flicking to the guard pacing outside the bars. Tamara's response was instant, a whip crack of fury. "Resisted? You? I'm on it. Don't say a word to them." The line clicked dead, and Zeke leaned back, staring at the ceiling's cracked plaster, her words echoing in his skull. Deputy Attorney General Tamara Marshall wasn't just his daughter. She was a force, a woman who'd climbed through law school and federal ranks with the same grit he'd once carried on picket lines. He trusted her, but trust didn't dull the ache in his ribs or the sting of dried blood on his chin. Minutes stretched into an hour, the cell's fluorescent hum drilling into his temples, until footsteps snapped him alert. A young cop, barely 25, buzz-cut blonde hair glinting under the lights, approached, his badge reading Daniels. The kid's hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, his green eyes darting like he expected a reprimand any second. "You're out," he muttered, swinging the door wide. "This ain't right what they did." Zeke stood slow, knees creaking, studying Daniel's face. Sweat beaded on the rookie's brow, his posture stiff but his gaze soft, almost guilty. "Why the change?" Zeke asked, stepping into the corridor, the air slightly less stale outside the bars. Daniels glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in, voice a whisper. "Your daughter called, lit up the captain's line, threatened feds if they didn't cut you loose." He slipped the cuffs off Zeke's wrists, the metal clattering to the floor, and added, "I saw the shove. Grayson's wrong." Zeke rubbed his wrists, the red marks fading but the weight lingering, and nodded once, a silent thanks. The kid might have been green, but he'd cracked open a door Grayson hadn't. Expected. Zeke grabbed his phone from the desk clerk, who avoided his eyes, and walked out into the dusk, the Memphis skyline bruising purple against the horizon. Freedom tasted sweet, the humid air a balm after the cell's chill. He thought it was over, the nightmare boxed up and buried. But freedom's a fickle thing when hate's got a badge. Zeke shuffled down Poplar Avenue, slippers scuffing the sidewalk, the station's concrete bulk shrinking behind him. He'd made it 2 blocks, the scent of magnolias mixing with exhaust, when headlights flared in his periphery. A low rumble grew, engine snarling, and his gut twisted. He turned just as 3 squad cars screeched around the corner, tires smoking, boxing him in like wolves circling a deer. Grayson leapt from the lead car, his bulk silhouetted against the flashing reds and blues, a radio crackling in his fist. "Assault on an officer," he bellowed, voice booming over the hum of gathering onlookers, his finger jabbing at Zeke. "You're not walking away that easy." The other cops fanned out, hands on holsters, their faces a mix of grim resolve and unease, but none dared challenge their sergeant. Zeke's pulse kicked up, not from fear, but from the sheer gall of it. "Assault?" he said, planting his feet chin high. "You mean when you slammed me into my own porch?" Grayson's grin was a slash of teeth, predatory and unhinged. "I mean when you swung at me, old man. Witnesses saw it." He waved the radio like a gavel, static spitting as he barked into it. "Suspects hostile, moving to detain." Lies piled on lies, each word a brick in a wall meant to crush Zeke's brief taste of relief. A woman in a nurse's scrubs paused across the street, phone out, recording as Grayson advanced, his boots thudding with purpose. "Hands up," he roared, and Zeke complied, palms open, the crowd swelling now, murmurs turning to shouts. "He didn't swing at nobody," a man in a delivery vest hollered. but Grayson ignored it, seizing Zeke's arm with a grip that promised bruises. The other cops closed in, one yanking Zeke's wrists behind his back, the cuffs snapping shut again, tighter this time, metal digging into flesh. "You think your daughter's call changes anything?" Grayson hissed, close enough for Zeke to smell the tobacco on his breath. "This is my city." The squad car door slammed shut, sealing Zeke inside once more, the vinyl seat now a familiar prison. Grayson climbed in front, barking orders as the convoy peeled out, lights flashing, like a victory parade. Through the window, Zeke saw the nurse still filming, her jaw set, and a knot of teens joining her, their phones a constellation of defiance. He leaned his head back, the ache in his ribs pulsing with every jolt of the road, and wondered how deep this hole would get before Tamara could pull him out. She'd rattled them, sure, but Grayson wasn't rattled enough to quit. He was doubling down, turning a shove into a fabricated assault, betting the system would back his play. The station loomed again, its lights harsher now in the fading day, and Zeke braced himself as Grayson hauled him out, shoving him through the doors with a force that rattled his teeth. Inside, the same clerk processed him, her fingers trembling as she typed, avoiding his gaze like he was a ghost. "Fair assault on an officer," Grayson announced to the room, his voice a challenge, daring anyone to contradict him. Daniel stood by the coffee machine, cup frozen halfway to his lips, his eyes widening as Zeke passed. The rookie's mouth twitched, like he wanted to speak, but fear glued his tongue. Zeke caught the look, a flicker of doubt in the kid's face, and filed it away. Maybe Daniels wasn't all in with Grayson's game, but maybe didn't mean much locked behind bars again. The cell door clanged shut, the sound a hammer on steel, and Zeke sank onto the bench, his slippers scuffing the floor. His phone was gone now, confiscated this time, leaving him cut off, alone with the hum of the lights and the weight of a lie pinning him down. Outside, the videos spread faster, clips of Grayson's shove from the porch mingling with new ones. So of this ambush, hashtags blooming like wildfire across screens. Justice for Zeke trended, a drumbeat of outrage pulsing through Memphis, but inside these walls, it was just noise. Grayson leaned against the bars, arms crossed, his smirk a promise of worse to come. "Sleep tight," he said, turning away, his boots echoing down the hall. Zeke closed his eyes, picturing Tamara's face, her sharp mind already working angles. He couldn't see. She'd gotten him out once. Could she do it again? Or had Grayson just lit a match that would burn them both? Drop a comment with the number 1 if you think Grayson's lying through his teeth to frame an innocent man. Hit that like button if Zeke's calm strength is getting you fired up, and subscribe if you're ready to see this fight explode. Because tomorrow's twist will flip everything you thought you knew. What happens when a daughter's power clashes with a cop's vendetta? Stick around to find out. Ezekiel Marshall's shoulders ached as the squad car jolted through Memphis streets, the cuffs biting deeper into his wrists, the air inside thick with the tang of gasoline and Grayson's smug silence. The city blurred past, neon signs flickering, in the twilight. But Zeke's mind stayed sharp, replaying the ambush on Poplar Avenue, Grayson's fabricated assault charge ringing hollow yet heavy. The station's lights loomed again, a third visit in one day, and this time Grayson didn't march him straight to booking. Instead, the sergeant steered the car down a side street, tires crunching gravel as they pulled into a shadowed alley behind a shuttered warehouse. Zeke's pulse quickened, not from fear but from the prickling certainty that this wasn't routine. Grayson killed the engine, his bulk twisting in the front seat to face Zeke, eyes glinting like a predator's in the dimness. "Out," he barked, flinging the door open and yanking Zeke onto the uneven pavement, his slippers snagging on a shard of glass. The wiry cop from the porch lingered by the car, shifting his weight, while Grayson loomed over Zeke, his meaty hands flexing. "So you're a slippery one," he said, voice low, almost playful, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver watch, its face scratched but gleaming under a street lamp's weak glow. Zeke's brow furrowed, confusion cutting through, the ache in his ribs. "What's that?" he asked, but Grayson didn't answer, just smirked and slipped the watch into Zeke's pants pocket with a deliberate shove, patting it down like a gift. "Evidence," Grayson said, stepping back, his grin widening into something feral. "Stolen from a jewelry store 3 blocks over. Funny how it ended up on you." Zeke's stomach dropped, the weight of the metal against his thigh, a noose, tightening around his neck. "You're planting it," he said, voice steady but edged with steel, his gaze locked on Grayson's. "That's a lie, and you know it." Grayson chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding underfoot, and nodded to the wiry cop, who finally stepped forward, radio crackling as he muttered, "Suspect detained with stolen property." The alley swallowed the words, but Zeke knew they'd echo far beyond these brick walls. Grayson hauled him back into the car, the door slamming with a clang that rattled his teeth, and they sped off, the warehouse fading into the night. Minutes later, the station's bustle swallowed them again, but this time camera flashes greeted them outside. News vans lined the curb, reporters jostling with microphones, their lenses catching every stumble as Grayson paraded Zeke through. The doors. "Dangerous senior nabbed with stolen goods," a voice shouted, and Zeke's jaw tightened, the absurdity of it clashing with the reality of cuffs cutting his skin. Inside, the clerk processed him with robotic efficiency, logging the watch as evidence, her fingers flying over keys while avoiding his eyes. "Theft," Grayson announced to the room, his tone a challenge, and Zeke stood silent, letting the lie hang, knowing words wouldn't dent this script yet. The cell door clanged shut again, the bench a familiar slab of ice against his spine, but the weight of the frame-up pressed harder than the concrete. He'd been a suspect for breathing, then for assault, and now a thief, each charge a brushstroke in Grayson's portrait of guilt. Hours ticked by, the station's hum a dull roar, until a commotion broke through, voices rising in the hall. Zeke sat up as a suited man burst in, Tamara's legal aide, his tie askew, face flushed with urgency. "Marshal's out on bail," he snapped at the guard, slapping papers on the desk. "Federal order, now." The guard fumbled with keys, and Zeke rose, limping slightly as the door swung wide. "Your daughter's team's on fire," the aide said, guiding him past glaring cops to the exit. "Videos from the street hit every network. Judge had no choice." Zeke nodded, the air outside sharp with exhaust and promise, his slippers scuffing the pavement as he headed home. Bail. Papers crumpled in his fist. The watch was still in evidence, but he was free, the alley's shadow lifting for a moment. Dusk had deepened into night by the time Zeke reached his street, the familiar sagging porches and buzzing cicadas, a balm after the station's chaos. His house stood quiet, the porch railing still splintered from Grayson's shove, a silent witness to the day's unraveling. He eased up the steps, knee protesting, and fumbled with his keys, the lock clicking open with a soft thud. Inside, the air was stale, the scent of wood polish and old books unchanged, a slice of normalcy he clung to as he sank into his armchair. The TV flickered on, news channels replaying the alley arrest, pundits debating escalating crime, while grainy footage showed Grayson's triumphant smirk. Zeke's phone buzzed, Tamara's name lighting the screen, but before he could answer, a crash shattered the stillness. Glass sprayed across the living room, a brick skidding to a stop at his feet, its rough surface scrawled with black marker. "Snitches die." Zeke's breath caught, the phone slipping to the cushion as he stared at the jagged hole where his window had been. Shards glinted on the rug, catching the TV's glow, and the night outside pressed in, thick with menace. He stood, slow, deliberate, and crossed to the brick, lifting it with hands that didn't shake, though his chest burned with a fury he hadn't felt since the 60s. The words weren't just a threat, they were a promise, Grayson's fingerprints all over them, even if his hands hadn't thrown it. Zeke's eyes flicked to the street, shadows shifting beyond the porch, the hum of a distant engine fading into silence. He'd walked free, sure, but freedom was a lie when hate could reach through your walls. The news droned on, oblivious. As he set the brick on the table, its weight a challenge he couldn't ignore. He grabbed his phone, dialing Tamara, her voice cutting through on the first ring. "Dad, you okay?" she asked, sharp and focused, the sound of papers rustling in the background. "Brick through the window," he said, keeping it short, his gaze locked on the gaping hole. "They're not stopping." Her silence stretched, then hardened. "I saw the bail footage. They're burying themselves. Stay put, I'm sending someone." The call ended, and Zeke sank back into the chair, the brick a dark sentinel beside him. The videos had forced his release, but Grayson had twisted the narrative, painting him a thief, a danger, and now this, a warning etched in stone. His fingers traced the splintered railing through the open door, the day's bruises pulsing under his skin, and he knew this wasn't the end. It was a dare, a taunt from a man who'd rather burn the world than lose his grip. Outside, the street wasn't asleep. Eyes watched from behind curtains. Phones still glowed, capturing the aftermath. The brick's message spreading like ink in water. The news vans hadn't followed him home yet, but they would, and when they did, this would be another headline, another twist in a story spiraling beyond his porch. Zeke's mind turned, not to fear but to strategy, decades of survival sharpening. His resolve. Tamara's team was fighting. The judge had bent, but Grayson was a bulldog, jaws locked, dragging this deeper into the mud. The brick wasn't just a threat. It was a gauntlet, and Zeke wasn't about to let it lie unanswered. He closed his eyes, the ache in his bones a steady drumbeat, and waited for the next move, knowing the night held more than shadows. Ezekiel Marshall stood in his shattered living room, the brick scrawled threat, "Snitches die," staring back at him from the table, its edges rough against the polished wood. The jagged hole in his window let in the Memphis night, humid and buzzing with cicadas, but the stillness inside felt like the calm before a storm. He'd barely slept, the ache in his ribs a dull pulse, his mind churning over Grayson's latest move. The TV flickered, muted, replaying the alley arrest, pundits dissecting the watch in his pocket, their voices a distant hum as he paced to the kitchen. Coffee brewed, black and bitter, a lifeline to keep him sharp, but before he could pour a cup, a shout sliced through the quiet. "There he is!" a voice bellowed, raw and furious, and Zeke's head snapped toward the street. Shadows swelled beyond the porch, figures spilling from cars and alleys, their faces twisted with hate under the glow of street lamps. He crossed to the window, peering through the broken glass, and his gut clenched. Dozens of them, maybe 50, a mob of white men clutching bottles and bats, their eyes locked on his house like hounds on a scent. "Thief, cop-hater," they roared, words slurring into a chant as they surged closer, boots stomping the pavement. Zeke's phone buzzed, Tamara's name flashing, and he answered fast, voice low. "They're here," he said, watching a bottle arc through the air, smashing against his mailbox with a crack that echoed like gunfire. "Who?" she demanded, her tone sharp, papers rustling behind her. "Mob. Grayson's doing," he replied, stepping back as another projectile shattered the porch light, plunging the front yard into flickering chaos. "Stay put, Dad. Feds are 10 minutes out," she said, and the line cut, leaving him alone with the growing roar outside. Zeke moved quick, decades of instinct kicking in, dragging his old oak dresser across the floor to barricade the door. Its legs screeched against the hardwood, a sound drowned by the mob's screams as they reached the steps. Glass exploded inward, bottles bursting through the remaining windows, spraying shards across the rug like deadly confetti. "Come out!" "You old bastard!" a man yelled, his voice thick with liquor, and Zeke ducked as a brick sailed past, thudding into the wall where his head had been. Pictures rattled, his wife's smiling face in a silver frame tipping to the floor, and his chest burned. Not from fear, but from the violation of it all. He grabbed a broom, shoving it through the dresser's handles to lock it tight, then retreated to the kitchen, heart pounding as the mob hammered the door, wood splintering under their fists. Outside, the street turned into a war zone, the mob's numbers swelling as more pickup trucks screeched up, tires smoking. A tall figure in a red cap waved a phone, Grayson's leaked suspect photo glowing on the screen, Zeke's face plastered across it with lies. Armed, dangerous, cop killer. The sergeant wasn't here, but his poison was, seeping into every shout, every swing. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some filming, others frozen, the air thick with gasoline fumes as a Molotov cocktail flared to life in a man's hand. "Burn him out," someone cheered, and Zeke's breath caught, the flame's reflection dancing in his eyes. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from under the sink, its weight cold and reassuring, and crouched low, waiting for the crash. It came fast, the bottle smashing through the kitchen window, flames licking the curtains, but he sprayed it down, foam hissing as the blaze died, smoke curling up to the ceiling. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing, and the mob hesitated, heads turning toward the sound. Federal agents, Tamara's cavalry, roared onto the street, black SUVs skidding to a halt, doors flying open as men in vests leapt out, shouting commands. "Disperse, now!" an agent bellowed, megaphone amplifying his voice over the chaos, and the mob scattered, some bolting for cars, others dropping weapons in the grass. Bats clattered to the ground, bottles rolled into the gutter, and within minutes the street emptied, the agent's flashlight sweeping the wreckage. Zeke eased the dresser aside, stepping onto the porch as an agent approached, badge glinting. "You Ezekiel Marshall?" the man asked, voice clipped. Zeke nodded, wiping soot from his hands. "That's me." The agent scanned the damage, the charred curtains, the glass-strewn lawn. "You're safe now, we've got this," he said, but Zeke's eyes lingered on the shadows beyond, unconvinced. He sank into a porch chair, the night air heavy with smoke and silence, the feds patrolling the block like sentinels. His house stood battered but intact, a fortress breached yet unbowed, and he let out a slow breath, thinking the worst had passed. The TV inside, unmuted now, blared a news update. Mob disperses after attacking elderly man's home. Police suspect linked to viral arrest. Zeke's lips twitched, a grim half-smile as he pictured Tamara's fury driving those agents here. She'd saved him again, her power a shield against Grayson's venom. He rubbed his knee, the old hake flaring, and leaned back, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in hours. Maybe this was the turning point, the moment the tide shifted, but tides don't shift when hate's this deep. Hours later, as dawn bled pink across the sky, Zeke jolted awake to a new sound, engines revving, louder, angrier than before. He stumbled to the window, coffee cold in his grip, and froze. The mob was back, tripled in size, spilling from trucks and vans, their numbers stretching down the block. Bats gleamed in the morning light, chains dangled from fists, and a man in a black hoodie waved a rifle, its barrel catching the sun. "He's still here," the man shouted, pointing at Zeke's house, and the crowd roared, a wall of rage surging. Forward. Grayson's photo had lit the fuse, but this was no longer just a mob. It was an army, armed and unhinged, fueled by a lie that wouldn't die. Zeke's heart slammed against his ribs as he grabbed his phone, dialing Tamara, but the line buzzed dead, signal lost. The feds were gone. Their watch ended too soon, and he was alone, facing a storm he'd thought he'd outrun. Comment with a 1 if you're raging at Grayson for turning a quiet street into a battlefield. Hit that like button if Zeke's grit against this madness has you hooked, and subscribe if you're dying to see how he survives this nightmare, because tomorrow's twist will leave you speechless. Can one man stand against a hate-fueled horde when even the feds can't stop it? Find out next time. Ezekiel Marshall gripped his phone, the dead signal a silent scream as the mob's roar swelled outside his Memphis home, their chains clinking like a death knell in the dawn light. The feds had vanished, their SUVs long gone, leaving him alone. Against a tide of hate tripled in size, rifles glinting among the bats and bottles. He stumbled back from the window, heart hammering, and grabbed a kitchen chair, wedging it under the doorknob as the first thud shook the frame. Glass crunched under his slippers, remnants of the night's assault, and he scanned the room for anything else to hold the line, his breath shallow, mind racing. Then a knock cut through the chaos, sharp and deliberate, not the mob's wild, pounding. He froze, peering through the peephole, and saw Officer Daniels, the rookie from the station, standing stiff on the porch, his blonde buzz cut stark against the morning haze, green eyes darting nervously. Zeke cracked the door, chair, still braced, and Daniels raised his hands, palms out, voice low. "Fair, it's me, I'm here to help." The mob's shouts echoed, "Burn it down." But the kid stepped closer, slipping inside as Zeke relented, shutting the door fast. Daniel's uniform was wrinkled, sweat staining the collar, and he paced. The shattered living room, glancing at the charred curtains, the brick on the table. "I saw the videos," he said, words tumbling out. "Grayson's out of control. That watch, the shove, all of it. I'll testify. Get him off the street." Zeke studied him, the rookie's twitchy hands, the flicker of shame in his gaze, and felt a spark of hope ignite. "You mean that?" he asked, leaning on the wall, knee throbbing. Daniels nodded, swallowing hard. I was there. I'll swear it in court. He can't keep doing this. Zeke pulled out his phone, signal flickering back, and hit record, the red dot blinking as he set it on the table. Say it again, he said, voice firm, and Daniels straightened, facing the device. I'm Officer Kyle Daniels. Sergeant Grayson assaulted Ezekiel Marshall on his porch, planted a watch to frame him, and lied about an assault charge. I saw it all. His voice cracked once, but he pushed through, detailing the alley, the mob's spark, every dirty move. Grayson had pulled. Zeke listened, the words a lifeline, a weapon to turn this nightmare around. We'll sue, he said when Daniels finished, stopping the recording, the file saved with a soft chime. Take this public. Nail him to the wall. Daniels nodded, a faint smile breaking through his nerves. I'm in. Let's do it. They shook hands, Zeke's grip steady despite the bruises, and for a moment the mob's din faded, replaced by a plan taking shape. Daniels left through the back, promising to meet Zeke's lawyer by noon, and Zeke called Tamara, her voice cutting through on the third ring. Dad, you safe? She asked, urgency sharp. For now, he said, glancing at the barricaded door. Got a cop on our side, Daniels. Recorded him. He's testifying. Tamara exhaled, a rare softness creeping in. Good. I'll get the team on it. Stay low. The call ended and Zeke sank into his armchair, the recording a shield against the chaos outside. He pictured Grayson's smirk crumbling, the mob dispersing under truth's weight, and let his eyes close, exhaustion tugging at him. The mob still raged, but the feds would return, Tamara's iron will driving them, and Daniel's words were gold in his pocket. Sleep didn't come, but a fragile calm did, the first in days. That calm shattered by midday. Zeke jolted awake to sirens, not the mob's chaos, but a controlled wail, and he shuffled to the TV, flicking it on. A press conference filled the screen, live from City Hall, reporters packed tight, cameras rolling. Daniel stood at a podium, uniform crisp now, his face pale but composed. Zeke's stomach twisted, a premonition clawing up his spine as the rookie cleared his throat. I'm here to set the record straight, Daniels began, voice steady, and Zeke leaned forward, expecting the bombshell. There's been talk about Sergeant Grayson, about Ezekiel Marshall. I was there. I saw it. All. A pause, then the knife. Marshall tried to bribe me. Offered cash to lie about Grayson. I refused, that's the truth. The room erupted, questions flying, and Zeke's breath stopped, his hand fumbling for the phone. The recording was gone, the file erased, the screen blank where it should have glowed. Hacked, stolen, turned to ash. He stared, numb, as Daniels stepped back, Grayson looming behind him, arms crossed, a faint nod of approval on his smug face. The news ticker scrolled, Officer retracts claims, alleges extortion by suspect. Zeke's chest burned, betrayal, sinking claws deep, the rookie's shaky guilt from the cell now a mask for cowardice or cash. Grayson had flipped him, bought him, and taken the one weapon Zeke had forged. The mob's chants outside grew louder, feeding off the broadcast, but before he could process it, boots thundered up his steps. The door rattled, not from fists but authority, and Grayson burst in, warrant clutched high, his bulk filling the frame. Ezekiel Marshall, you're under arrest, he bellowed, voice dripping with triumph. Extortion! Caught you red-handed. Two cops flanked him, one seizing Zeke's arms, the other snatching his phone, now useless as evidence. Zeke didn't fight, his body stiff but unyielding as they dragged him out, the warrant a flimsy shield for Grayson's vendetta. You paid him, he said, locking eyes with the sergeant, his tone ice-cold. Turned a kid into your dog. Grayson's laugh was a guttural rasp echoing off the porch. Prove it, old man. Oh, wait, you can't. The crowd parted, not the mob now, but neighbors, phones up, filming as Zeke stumbled down the steps. Cuffs snapping tight again, the metal a familiar sting. The squad car waited, engine idling, and Grayson shoved him inside, the door slamming with a finality that shook the air. Nobody's saving you now, he said, climbing in front, his smirker blade twisting in Zeke's gut. The car lurched forward, tires crunching glass, and Zeke stared out. The street a blur of faces, some angry, some stunned, all powerless against this new lie. The station swallowed him again. The same concrete walls, the same clerks' averted eyes, but the charge felt heavier. A noose woven from Daniel's words and Grayson's cash. They booked him fast, fingerprints smearing ink across his hands, the routine a mockery of justice. "Extortion," the clerk muttered, typing, and Zeke stood silent, his mind racing past the cell to Tamara, to the lost recording, to the mob, still lurking beyond these walls. Grayson lingered, watching, his presence a taunt daring Zeke to crack. "Sleep tight," he said again, the same line from before, but this time it carried a weight of victory, a promise of more to come. The cell door clanged shut. The bench colder now, and Zeke sank onto it, slippers scuffing the floor, his breath slow, deliberate. Daniel's had been a lifeline, a crack in Grayson's armor, but that crack had sealed shut, leaving him trapped, in a deeper pit. Outside, the press conference replayed on every screen. Daniel's betrayal a wildfire spreading doubt, drowning the porch videos in a flood of "he said, she said." The mob fed on it, their rage sharpening, but Zeke didn't hear it. The cell's hum his only companion. He closed his eyes, picturing Tamara's face, her fury when she learned this twist, and clung to the certainty she'd fight. Grayson thought he'd won, turning an ally into a dagger. But Zeke had survived worse betrayals in 63 and 70 in a lifetime of battles. This wasn't the end. It was a gauntlet, and he'd pick it up, even if it meant clawing through the dark, alone. Ezekiel Marshall sat on the cell's bench, the concrete a slab of ice against his spine, his slippers scuffing the floor as the hum of the Memphis station buzzed around him. Daniel's betrayal stung sharper than the cuffs that had bound him. The lost recording a ghost in his empty phone, Grayson's smirk a brand burned into his mind. Hours bled into a sleepless night, the extortion charge a weight he couldn't shake, until a guard's keys jangled at dawn, the door swinging wide. "Court, now," the man grunted, and Zeke rose, knees creaking, his polo wrinkled but his chin high. They marched him out, the station's fluorescent glare fading into morning sun, as a van whisked him to the courthouse, its stone steps looming like a battlefield. Inside, the air was cool, thick with the scent of polish and paper, and he spotted Tamara in the hall, her suit crisp, eyes blazing with a fury he knew too well. She strode over, heels clicking, and gripped his shoulders, scanning him for new bruises. "I've got this, Dad," she said, voice low, steel beneath the softness. "Grayson's done." Zeke nodded, trusting her fire, and followed as she led him into the courtroom, a cavern of wood and whispers, the gallery packed with reporters, neighbors, strangers drawn by the viral storm. The judge, a wiry woman with grey streaks in her bun, banged her gavel, silencing the hum, and Zeke took his seat, cuffs off now, hands free but heavy with exhaustion. Grayson stood across the room, uniform swapped for a cheap suit, his buzz cut stark under the lights, his smirk replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. Daniels lingered behind him, eyes down, the rookie's guilt a shadow he couldn't hide. Tamara's legal team moved fast, a lawyer named Carter stepping up, his voice smooth as he laid out the case. "Your Honor, Ezekiel Marshall's been targeted. Framed, assaulted by Sergeant Victor Grayson. We've got evidence." He clicked a remote and a screen flared to life, showing shaky footage from Zeke's street. Grayson slamming him into the porch railing, blood on his lip, neighbors filming. Gasps rippled through the room, and Carter pressed on. "This isn't extortion, it's retaliation. Grayson planted a watch, fabricated charges, and turned a rookie into a pawn." He tossed a stack of affidavits onto the table, neighbor statements, piling up like bricks. The porch, the alley, the mob all caught on camera. Grayson shifted, fists clenching but said nothing, his lawyer whispering frantically beside him. The judge leaned forward, glasses glinting as she scanned the papers, then fixed Grayson with a stare that could cut glass. "Sergeant, you've got an answer for this?" she asked, voice dry, and Grayson's lawyer stammered, "Unreliable witnesses, Your Honor, edited videos." But Carter was ready, cueing another clip. Jamal's smashed phone, the mob's bottles, the brick through Zeke's window. "Unreliable," he shot back. "This is a pattern. Grayson's a threat, not my client." The room buzzed, reporters scribbling, and Zeke felt a flicker of relief, Tamara's hand brushing his arm as she whispered, "We've got him." The judge nodded, flipping through the affidavits, her silence a gavel of its own. Minutes stretched. Then she spoke. Charges dismissed. Insufficient evidence of extortion. Sergeant Grayson, you're suspended pending investigation. A cheer erupted from the gallery, and Grayson's face darkened, his jaw a vice as he glared at Zeke. Zeke stood, legs shaky but spine straight, and turned to Tamara, her smile fierce as she pulled him into a hug. "Told you," she said, and he chuckled, the sound rough but real, the first in days. They walked out together, the courthouse steps swarming with cameras, mics thrusting forward as reporters shouted questions. "Justice served," one yelled, and Zeke paused, letting the sun warm his face, the weight of the cell lifting. "Not yet," he said, loud enough for them to hear, "but it's a start." Tamara guided him to her car, a sleek black sedan, and they drove home, the city blurring past, a fragile peace settling in. He thought of Grayson's suspension, the video's power, and believed for a moment the tide had turned. The street was quiet when they arrived, the mob gone, his house still standing despite its scars, and he sank into his armchair, Tamara brewing coffee in the kitchen, the aroma a promise of normalcy. That promise burned away at midnight. Zeke jolted awake, a crackling roar pulling him from sleep, the air thick with a sharp, acrid bite. He stumbled to the window, heart slamming, and saw flames licking the porch, orange tongues curling up the walls, swallowing decades of memories in a hungry blaze. Smoke poured in, stinging his eyes, and he grabbed his phone, dialing Tamara as he coughed, lungs seizing. "Fire," he rasped, and her voice snapped back. "Get out! I'm coming!" He staggered to the back door, heat searing his skin, the crack of wood splintering behind him as the living room ignited. The night air hit him like a slap as he burst outside, collapsing in the yard, grass cool against his palms, the house a pyre lighting the sky. Neighbors screamed, phones out, filming as flames devoured his wife's photos, his books, the life he'd built brick by brick. Sirens wailed, fire trucks screeching up, hoses blasting water that hissed into steam. But Zeke knew it was too late. The roof caved, a groan of timber and ash, and he sat, chest heaving, watching it all crumble. Tamara's car skidded in, her door flying open as she ran to him, dropping to her knees. "Dad, you okay?" she asked, hands gripping his shoulders, and he nodded, voice lost to the smoke. She pulled him close, her suit smudged with soot, and they watched the firefighters battle a losing fight, the blaze a message written in fire. Grayson's cronies, no doubt. His suspension a spark for revenge, not defeat. Zeke's eyes stung, not just from the haze, but from the loss. The porch where he'd sipped tea, now a skeleton of charred beams. "He's not done," he said, hoarse, and Tamara's grip tightened, her silence a vow. The street filled, neighbors clustering, some weeping, others filming, the glow casting long shadows as news vans rolled in, reporters shouting over the chaos. "Arson at Marshall's home," one cried, and Zeke stood leaning on Tamara, the weight of the day crashing down. The courtroom win meant nothing now, ashes where justice should have stood, Grayson's hate striking harder than any gavel. He limped to her car, the heat still pulsing at his back, and sank into the seat. The brick's threat from days ago, a prophecy fulfilled. Tamara climbed in, engine roaring to life, and drove off, leaving the wreckage behind. But Zeke knew this wasn't escape. It was a pause, a breath before the next blow, and he clenched his fists, resolve hardening in the ruin. Drop a comment with a 1 if you're furious. Grayson's burning Zeke's life to the ground over a bruised ego. Hit that like button if Tamara's courtroom smackdown gave you chills, and subscribe if you're locked in for this roller coaster, because tomorrow's turn will hit like a freight train. What happens when a man with nothing left faces a monster who won't quit? You'll see soon enough. Ezekiel Marshall slumped in the passenger seat of Tamara's sedan, the glow of his burning home fading in the rearview mirror, ash clinging to his slippers as the Memphis night swallowed them whole. Smoke lingered in his lungs, a bitter reminder of the life Grayson's cronies had torched, and his hands trembled, not from fear but from a rage simmering beneath his exhaustion. Tamara drove in silence, her knuckles white on the wheel, the city's neon blur a stark contrast to the ruin they'd left behind. "Where to?" he asked, voice rough, and she glanced at him, eyes hard. "Motel," Off the grid. You're not safe anywhere they can find you. He nodded, too tired to argue, and leaned back, the seat's leather cool against his sweat-soaked polo, the ache in his ribs a steady drumbeat as they turned onto a quiet highway. The motel was a squat, peeling relic 10 miles out, its sign flickering vacancy in sickly yellow, the lot empty save for a rusted pickup. Tamara paid cash, no questions asked, and ushered Zeke into room 12. The air inside stale with mildew and cigarette ghosts. A single bed sagged in the corner, a chipped table beside it, and he sank onto the mattress, springs groaning under his weight. "Stay here," she said, setting a burner phone on the table, its plastic casing cold to the touch. "I'm leaking the arson to the press. Grayson's finished." She squeezed his shoulder, a rare crack in her armor, and left, the door clicking shut, leaving him with the hum of a dying AC unit and the weight of his new reality. Homeless, hunted, a ghost in his own city. Zeke flicked on the TV, the screen buzzing to life, and news channels erupted with the story Tamara had unleashed. Arson rocks Memphis. Ezekiel Marshall's home destroyed hours after courtroom win, a reporter intoned, footage of the blaze looping behind her, flames licking the night sky. Protests flared on screen, crowds swelling downtown, signs reading, "Justice for Zeke," waving above a sea of fists. His face flashed next, the port shove, the alley arrest, a grainy still from the mob's siege, and he watched numb as strangers chanted his name, their voices a distant roar through the motel's thin walls. The burner buzzed, Tamara's number glowing, and he answered fast. "It's everywhere," she said, urgency sharp. "Protests are shutting streets. They can't ignore this." He exhaled, a flicker of hope sparking. "Good," he said, but the spark dimmed as he glanced at the window, blinds slanting shadows across the floor, the night outside too quiet. That quiet shattered at dawn. Zeke jolted awake, the TV still droning, a new headline slicing through his haze. Ezekiel Marshall, armed and dangerous. His mugshot filled the screen, eyes hollow from the station's ink and flash, a ticker scrolling lies. Suspect in arson of own home, wanted for questioning. His stomach dropped, the burner clutched in his fist as he dialed Tamara, but the call cut mid-ring, a dead tone mocking him. The news anchor's voice hardened. "Sergeant Victor Grayson, off duty, claims Marshall's a flight risk, possibly armed after threatening officers." Zeke's jaw clenched. Grayson's voice, echoing from a clip smooth and venomous. "He's a danger to this community. We're bringing him in." Choppers thumped overhead, a low rumble shaking the motel's flimsy frame, and he peeked through the blinds, spotting searchlights slicing the sky, a manhunt unfurling like a net. He grabbed his slippers, the only thing left of home, and stuffed the burner in his pocket. Mind racing. Grayson, suspended but unbroken, had twisted the arson into a trap, pinning the fire on him. A masterstroke of revenge. The motel door rattled, not from cops, but the wind. But Zeke knew time was bleeding out. He slipped outside, the gravel lot, biting his feet, and ducked behind the pickup, heart pounding as a squad car rolled past, slow and predatory. The highway stretched dark, no refuge in sight, and he limped toward a ditch, the chopper's buzz growing louder, their beams raking. The earth. Protests might have shaken the city, but Grayson had turned him into prey, a fugitive in a game rigged from the start. He crouched low, mud soaking his knees, and waited, breath shallow, the burner his last lifeline if it still worked. Hours crawled by, the sun climbing, sweat beading on his brow as he hid, the manhunt's pulse throbbing through Memphis. News vans swarmed the motel by noon, reporters sniffing his trail, but he'd slipped deeper into the brush, a tangle of vines and thorns his shield. The burner buzzed faint, and he answered, Tamara's voice crackling through static. "Dad, you there?" she asked, panic edging her calm. "Barely," he rasped, glancing at the sky, choppers circling closer. "They're hunting me. Grayson's lie." She cursed, a rare slip, and said, "I leaked the fire. It's backfiring, but there's worse." A pause, then the blow. "They suspended me. Abusing power to protect you. I'm off the board." Zeke's chest tightened, her words a sledgehammer. "Suspended?" he echoed, and she sighed, bitter. Grayson's got friends upstairs. I'm out, but I'm not done. He sank lower, the ditch's mud cold against his palms. Tamara's suspension a gut punch that left him reeling. She'd been his anchor, her title a shield, and now Grayson had stripped it, leaving him exposed, a 74-year-old man dodging bullets in a briar patch. "What now?" he asked, voice hoarse, and she said, "Hide. I've got people off book. We'll turn this." The call cut, static swallowing her promise, and Zeke pocketed the phone. The choppers thrum a heartbeat overhead. Grayson's voice looped in his skull. Armed and dangerous, a lie so bold it bent reality, turning protests into a manhunt, his name a curse on every radio. He crawled deeper, thorns snagging his sleeves, the motel a distant speck now, and wondered how long he could run before the net closed. The day stretched, heat baking the earth, and Zeke stayed low, moving when the choppers veered, resting when exhaustion clawed his bones. News drifted from a trucker's radio nearby, protesters clashing with riot gear downtown, tear gas clouding the air, but here it was just him and the hunt. Grayson, off duty but pulling strings, had painted him a monster, the arson his masterpiece, and Zeke's every step sank him deeper into the lie. His knee screamed, the old March injury a fire under his skin, but he pushed on, the burner silent now, Tamara's absence a void he couldn't fill. Night fell, stars piercing the canopy, and he found a hollow under an oak, curling into it, the earth cool against his back. Sleep didn't come, just the chopper's endless drone, a promise that Grayson wouldn't rest until he was caged or worse. By morning, the manhunt tightened, squad cars combing back roads, dogs barking in the distance, their howls a blade at his throat. Zeke clutched the burner, its battery fading, and checked the news on a stolen glance at a gas station TV through the brush. Marshall still at large, the anchor said, Grayson's photo beside his, the sergeant's suspension, a footnote to his hunt. Tamara's leak had sparked fury, but Grayson's counterstrike had turned it against Zeke, a fugitive with no home, no ally in reach. He limped on, the ditch giving way to a creek, water soaking his slippers, and paused, breath ragged, the choppers, lights slicing closer. Grayson had taken his house, his freedom, and now his daughter's power, each blow a sledgehammer, but Zeke's resolve hardened, a coal glowing in the dark. He'd survived dogs in '63. He'd survived this. But how with the world-turned hunter? Ezekiel Marshall crouched in the creek's shallow water, the cold seeping through his slippers, his breath fogging in the Memphis dawn as chopper blades thumped overhead, their searchlights slicing the brush like knives. The manhunt had chased. Him through night and day, Grayson's armed and dangerous lie a noose tightening with every step, and his knee burned, the old March injury a relentless flare. The burner phone in his pocket buzzed faintly, battery on its last gasp, and he ignored it, pushing through the reeds toward a flicker of neon in the distance. A barbershop sign, Ray's Cuts, glowing above a brick storefront. He knew Ray, a grizzled vet who'd clipped his hair for 30 years, a man who'd never turn him away. The creek gave way to asphalt, and Zeke limped across, the shop's door creaking as he slipped inside, the scent of aftershave and leather, a balm against the mud caking his skin. Ray looked up from sweeping broom-frozen mid-stroke, his grey beard twitching as he took in Zeke's soaked polo, the wildness in his eyes. "Lord Zeke, what's this?" he rasped, voice gravelly from years of smokes, and Zeke sank into a chair, breath ragged. "Trouble, Grayson. Need a spot to hide." Ray nodded, no questions, and locked the door, flipping the closed sign as choppers buzzed closer. "Back room," he said, jerking a thumb toward a curtained nook, and Zeke shuffled in, collapsing onto a cot beside a stack of old magazines, the hum of the shop's radio his only company. Ray brought coffee, black and scalding, and Zeke sipped, the heat steadying his hands as he pulled out the burner, dialing Tamara despite the dying signal. "Rays," he whispered when she answered, her voice crackling. "I'm there too," she said, off-book allies already moving, and the line cut, leaving him with hope's faint pulse. The TV flickered on in the front, Ray muttering as news blared. Protest raging downtown, thousands marching with "Justice for Zeke" signs, the arson video looping alongside Grayson's manhunt lies. Zeke edged to the curtain, peering out, and saw Ray's phone on the counter, camera ready. "Record me," he said, stepping forward, and Ray raised a brow but complied, the red dot blinking as Zeke faced it, voice steady despite the ache in his bones. "I'm Ezekiel Marshall, 74. Grayson burned my home, framed me, hunted me. I'm no thief, no killer. This is his war on me, on us. Don't let him win." He stopped, chest heaving, and Ray uploaded it, the clip hitting. Screens fast, trending within hours. Zeke speaks a wildfire across Memphis, then beyond. Protesters swelled, voices thundering, and Zeke watched, a spark of defiance igniting through his exhaustion. By noon, the governor's face filled the news, a stern man in a pinstripe suit, his voice cutting through the static. "We're launching." A probe into Ezekiel Marshall's case. The manhunts paused pending review. Cheers erupted on screen, the chopper's hum fading as police stood down, and Zeke exhaled, sinking back onto the cot, the barbershop's quiet, a fragile shield. Ray clapped his shoulder, a rare grin breaking through. "You did it, man." "There." "Listening." Zeke nodded, the weight lifting slightly, his plea a crack in Grayson's wall. He pictured Tamara orchestrating this, her off-book team pulling strings, and let himself breathe, the cot springs creaking as he rested, thinking the storm might finally break. The protests roared on, a drumbeat of support, and he closed, his eyes, the first calm in days, settling over him like a blanket. That calm snapped at dusk. The shop's front door rattled, not a knock but a slam, and Zeke jolted upright, heart slamming as Ray peeked through the blinds. "Trouble," he hissed. And before Zeke could move, the door splintered, Grayson bursting in, off-duty but armed, his buzz cut glinting under the shop's lights. Two thugs flanked him, beefy men in black hoodies, fists clenched around tire irons, their eyes locked on Zeke like hounds on a fox. "Found you!" Grayson snarled, pistol drawn, and Ray lunged, broom raised, but a thug swung, cracking it across his skull. Ray crumpled, blood pooling on the tile, and Zeke staggered back, hands up as Grayson advanced, his grin a slash of teeth. "No probes saving you now," he said, and slammed the pistol's butt into Zeke's jaw, stars exploding in his vision. The thugs seized him, dragging him to the floor, boots stomping his ribs, each kick a thunderclap of pain. Blood trickled from his nose, warm and coppery, and Grayson loomed, tire iron snatched from a thug, swinging it down on Zeke's leg, the crack of bone echoing as agony seared through him. "Bar fight," Grayson barked, staging it, his voice cold. "You started it, old man." He kicked Zeke's side, ribs snapping, and the room spun, the shop's leather chairs blurring into shadow. Ray groaned, stirring, but the thugs pinned him, a knee on his back, and Grayson crouched, breath hot on Zeke's face. "You're done," he whispered, and swung again, the iron clipping Zeke's temple, darkness clawing at his edges. Zeke fought to stay conscious, the floor slick with his blood, the protest's distant roar, a mocking echo as Grayson's trap closed. The sergeant stood, wiping the tire iron on his sleeve, and nodded to the thugs. "Leave him. Cops'll find a brawl gone bad." They bolted, the door banging shut, and Zeke lay there, breath shallow, pain a tidal wave drowning his resolve. Ray crawled over, hands shaking as he pressed a towel to Zeke's head, blood soaking through fast. "Hang on," Ray rasped, dialing. 911. But Zeke's vision faded, the shop's hum swallowed by a void. Grayson had turned his plea into a beating, the governor's pause a window for revenge, and Zeke's body screamed, broken but unbowed, as sirens wailed in the distance, too late to stop the damage. The ambulance screeched up, medics rushing. In, their voices a blur as they lifted Zeke onto a stretcher, Ray shouting, "He's hurt bad!" Blood smeared the floor, a trail from the cot to the chaos, and Zeke's eyes fluttered, catching the TV still flickering. Protesters unaware, chanting his name while Grayson's fists rewrote the story. The stretcher rolled out, the shops, neon fading, and he clung to a thread of defiance. Tamara's face in his mind, her fight his anchor. Grayson thought this was checkmate, but Zeke had survived worse, and as the siren howled, he vowed to rise, even if it took every ounce of his shattered strength. Comment with a 1 if you're boiling over Grayson's gutless ambush on a man. Just trying to speak truth. Hit that like button if Zeke's barbershop stand has you rooting for his comeback. And subscribe if you're glued to this fight, because tomorrow's twist will drop your jaw. How far will a cornered cop go when the world's watching? Tune in to find out. Ezekiel Marshall's world blurred as the ambulance jostled through Memphis streets. The siren's wail a jagged pulse against the throbbing in his skull, blood pooling on the stretcher beneath him. Pain seared his leg where Grayson's tire. Iron had cracked bone, his ribs screaming with every shallow breath. The barbershop's chaos replaying in flashes, Ray's crumpled form, the thug's boots, Grayson's feral grin. Medics hovered, their hands steady but urgent, pressing gauze to his temple, shouting vitals over the roar. 74 male, multiple fractures, head trauma, one barked, and Zeke clung to consciousness. Tamara's voice in his mind urging him to hold on. The hospital loomed, a white fortress against the night, and they wheeled him in, doors banging wide, the sterile sting of antiseptic flooding his senses as lights glared overhead. Nurses swarmed, a flurry of scrubs and clipped orders, lifting him onto a bed, the sheets crisp against his battered skin. "He's crashing," a voice warned, and machines beeped frantic as they hooked him to tubes, fluids dripping into his veins. Zeke's vision swam, the ceiling tiles spinning, but a nurse, young with tight braids, caught his eye, her face softening as she adjusted his IV. "You're that guy," she whispered, recognition flickering, and he nodded weakly, lips cracking as he rasped. "Grayson," she frowned, then slipped away, her sneakers silent on the tile. Hours bled together, painkillers dulling the edges, and he drifted, the barbershop's blood-soaked floor fading into a haze, the protest's roar a distant hum through the hospital's walls. By morning, Zeke woke groggy, the room stark and quiet, sunlight slanting through blinds onto a tangle of bandages and casts. His leg was immobilized, ribs taped, head wrapped, but he was alive, the steady beep of a monitor proof of it. The TV flickered on, a nurse's remote clicking, and news filled the screen. Ezekiel Marshall hospitalized after brutal attack. Footage rolled, shaky but clear, Grayson's pistol swinging, the tire iron cracking down, filmed from a corner of Ray's shop. Zeke's breath caught, the nurse with the braids stepping in, her eyes fierce. "I leaked it," she said, voice low. "Found Ray's phone. Couldn't let them bury this." He stared, gratitude swelling, and she added, "It's everywhere now. They can't hide." The clip spread, viral in minutes, hashtags exploding, Grayson exposed, trending as protests surged anew, a tidal wave crashing over Memphis. The governor appeared next, face grim on a podium, flanked by flags. "Sergeant Victor Grayson is fired effective immediately," he declared, voice cutting through the static. "His actions are indefensible. We're investigating fully." Cheers erupted on screen, crowds outside the hospital swelling, their chants shaking the windows. "Justice, justice!" Zeke's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through the pain, the nurse nodding as she adjusted his pillow. "You did that," she said, and he exhaled, the weight of days lifting, Grayson's badge stripped, his lies cracking under the world's glare. Tamara burst in, suit rumpled, eyes red from sleepless nights, and dropped to his bedside, gripping his hand. "You're okay," she breathed, and he squeezed back, voice hoarse. "Thanks to you." She smiled, fierce, and they watched the TV, the governor's words a victory bell. Crowds gathered below, phones up, filming the hospital like a beacon, their voices a chorus of defiance. News anchors dissected the firing, pundits praising the nurses' leak, the video a hammer-smashing Grayson's narrative. Zeke rested, the bed's hum a steady rhythm, thinking this was it, the end of the hunt, the fire, the beatings. Grayson was down, his career ash like Zeke's home, and the world saw it, cheered it. Tamara stayed, her presence a shield, and he let exhaustion pull him under, the painkillers softening the edges, a fragile peace settling in. The nurse checked his chart, whispering, "You're a fighter," and he nodded, drifting, the crowd's roar a lullaby through the glass. That peace shattered at dusk. The TV flared, static hissing, cutting off a weather report mid-sentence, and a new image flickered on. Zeke, battered on the barbershop floor, but the audio was wrong, warped, his voice dubbed over, chillingly calm. "I burned my house, attacked the cops, I'm guilty." The screen glitched, Grayson's face appearing smug, off-duty but in control, a hijacked signal blasting across channels. "He confessed," Grayson said, eyes glinting. "Don't be fooled. He's a criminal, always was." Zeke bolted upright, pain flaring, and Tamara cursed, grabbing her phone, but the damage spread, the doctored clip looping, sowing doubt. The crowd below faltered, murmurs rippling, some lowering signs, others shouting louder, confusion fracturing their unity. Zeke's heart pounded, the hospital room shrinking as Grayson's voice boomed, a desperate lie clawing back power. "He hacked it," Tamara said, dialing frantically, her off-book team scrambling to trace the breach. "He's off the force, but he's got tech, friends." The nurse rushed in, eyes wide. "It's on every station," and Zeke clenched, his fists, bandages straining, the victory slipping through his fingers. Grayson, fired but unbowed, had turned the truth inside out, the video a twisted mirror, and the mob stirred again, boots stomping outside, bottles clinking, their rage reignited by the fake confession. Windows rattled, a brick smashing through one down the hall, and Zeke pushed himself up, ignoring the pain, resolve hardening. "He won't stop," he said, voice rough, and Tamara nodded, her call connecting. "We'll fix this," she vowed. But the mob's roar grew, a beast waking from a nap. The hospital buzzed, staff rushing, security barking into radios as the crowd split, some defending Zeke, others turning, Grayson's broadcast a poison seeping through. News vans swarmed closer, reporters shouting over the chaos, the governor's firing now a footnote to this new lie. Zeke sank back, leg throbbing, ribs aching, the room's sterile calm a mockery as the world tilted again. Tamara paced, phone to her ear, her voice a whip-cracking orders, but Zeke knew this wasn't over. Grayson had lost his badge, but not his hate, and this was his counterstrike, a desperate swing to drag Zeke down with him. The nurse hovered, hands wringing, and Zeke met her gaze, nodding once. "Keep fighting," he said, and she straightened, a soldier in scrubs as the mob's shouts pierced the walls, a war reignited by a ghost on the screen. Outside, the night thickened, choppers buzzing again, not for him, but the chaos. There, lights painting the crowd in stark relief. Zeke's mind churned, past the pain to strategy, decades of survival kicking in. Grayson thought this was his ace, but fakes crumble under scrutiny, and Tamara's team was sharp, relentless. He clung to that, the bed's edge digging into his palms, the TV looping the lie as sirens wailed closer. The mob pressed, a bottle shattering nearby, and he braced himself, knowing this was a battle of truth now, not just fists. Grayson had struck hard, but Zeke had the world's eyes, and he'd use them, even broken, even bleeding, to bury the man who'd burned his life to ash. Ezekiel Marshall gripped the hospital bed's rails, his bandaged hands trembling as the mob's roar crashed through the Memphis night, Grayson's hijacked broadcast fueling their fury like gasoline on a bonfire. Glass shattered down the hall, a bottle's jagged edge skittering across tile, and the room's sterile air thickened with the tang of smoke and panic. His leg throbbed, cast heavy, ribs screaming with every breath, but he pushed up, ignoring the nurse's gasp as she rushed, in her braid swinging. "They're breaking through," she cried, eyes wide, and Zeke nodded, voice hoarse. "Get me out." The TV blared, Grayson's fake confession looping, "I'm guilty." A lie splitting the crowd below into chaos, some chanting his name, others hurling bricks, their shouts a wall of noise shaking the building's bones. Footsteps thundered closer, security shouting into radios, "Bar the doors!" But the mob surged, boots stomping, windows exploding as they breached the lobby. Zeke swung his good leg over the bed, pain flaring, and the nurse hesitated, then grabbed a wheelchair, wheeling it over. "Basement," she said, helping him, in her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. The hall buzzed, patients screaming, staff fleeing, and she pushed him fast, dodging a gurney as a brick sailed through a window, glass raining like shrapnel. Elevators dinged, too slow, and she veered toward a stairwell. But a janitor, wiry with grey stubble, intercepted them. Mop abandoned. "This way," he rasped, jerking his head toward a service door. And Zeke nodded, trusting the man's quiet grit. The janitor shoved the door open, revealing a narrow stairwell, dank and dim, and the nurse wheeled Zeke in, the chair rattling. On concrete steps as they descended, the mob's roar muffling above. "Name's Clarence," the janitor said, taking the lead, his boots sure on the slick floor. "Saw you on TV, ain't right." Zeke gripped the arms, ribs jolting with every bump, and muttered, "Thanks." They hit the basement, a maze of pipes and flickering bulbs, the air cool with mildew, and Clarence guided them through, dodging crates to a loading dock, its metal shutter half up. "Out there," he said, pointing to an alley, and the nurse pushed, but a crash echoed behind, boots on stairs, the mob sniffing their trail. Zeke tensed, the chair creaking as Clarence yanked the shutter higher, the alley's shadows stretching. Beyond, a sliver of freedom. "Go!" he barked, and the nurse rolled him out, the night air sharp against his skin. But shouts erupted, a splinter group spotting them, bottles arcing through the dark. Clarence grabbed a pipe, swinging it at a thug who lunged, the clang ringing as the man dropped, but more came, a tide of hate spilling from the hospital's guts. Zeke pointed to a dumpster. "There," and the nurse swerved, shoving him behind. Trash stench cloaking them as the mob swept past, cursing his name. Clarence crouched beside, pipe bloody, breath ragged, and Zeke waited, pulse hammering, the siege a noose he'd slipped, barely. Above, the hospital burned, smoke billowing from broken windows, sirens wailing as police finally rolled in, riot gear clashing with the mob's chaos. Zeke's burner buzzed, Tamara's voice crackling through, faint but fierce. "Dad, you safe?" she asked, and he rasped. "Allie, hid." She exhaled. "Good. Watch this." The line cut, and minutes later, a news chopper's feed lit the sky, its spotlight catching a scene downtown. Tamara reinstated, storming a warehouse on live TV, feds at her back, Grayson in cuffs, his buzz cut stark as she shoved him into a van. "Victor Grayson arrested for assault, arson, fraud," she declared, voice a blade. And the crowd roared, protesters cheering, the broadcast cutting through the mob's lies like a scythe. Zeke's chest loosened, Tamara's triumph a lifeline, and he leaned back, the dumpster's steel cold against his spine. "She got him," he said, and Clarence grinned, pipe still clutched. "Damn right." The nurse checked his bandages, her hand steady now, and the alley quieted, the mob thinning. As news spread, Grayson's face in cuffs a hammer to their fury. Zeke thought it was over, the hospital siege broken, his daughter's iron will turning the tide. He closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling, the burner silent in his pocket, freedom tasting real for the first time in days. The chopper's thrum, faded, police sirens taking over, and he let himself believe the worst had passed. Grayson's reign ended in a blaze of justice. That belief crumbled at midnight. Tires screeched, a pickup skidding into the alley, and Zeke jolted awake, pain flaring as armed men leapt out, rifles gleaming, a militia in black vests, Grayson's loyalists unbowed by his arrest. "There!" one shouted, spotting him, and bullets cracked, splintering the dumpster as Clarence yanked Zeke down. The nurse diving behind a crate. "He's free," another bellowed, and they advanced, boots thudding, a dozen strong, their leader, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, firing shots through the safehouse's walls, a shack Tamara's team had moved him to after the alley. Glass sprayed, wood splintered, and Zeke crawled, leg dragging, ribs howling, the chair abandoned as Clarence pulled him toward a back exit. The militia pressed, relentless, their rifles spitting fire. A vengeance Grayson had ceded even in cuffs. "For Vic!" the leader roared, and a grenade rolled, bouncing toward them, its fuse hissing. Clarence kicked it back, the blast rocking the alley, shrapnel pinging off steel, and Zeke stumbled through the door, collapsing in a yard, grass wet under his palms. The nurse followed, blood on her scrubs, not hers, Clarence's, his arm torn open by a bullet. "Keep moving," he grunted, shoving them toward a fence, but the militia circled, headlights flaring, pinning them in a kill. "Sony," Zeke's breath rasped, the safe house a ruin. Tamara's arrest a spark for this new war, and he gripped the burner, dialing her, no answer. The signal dead as gunfire chewed the night. Police sirens wailed, distant, too slow, and the militia. Closed, their leader sneering, rifle raised. "You thought cuffs stopped us?" he spat. And Zeke stared, defiance burning through the pain, his voice steady. You're digging your grave." The man laughed, finger tightening, but a spotlight blazed, a chopper swooping low, feds dropping in, ropes swinging, their shouts drowning the militia's fire. Bullets flew, chaos erupting, and Zeke rolled, Clarence dragging him behind a shed, the nurse pressing his wounds, blood slick on her hands. The militia scattered, some cut down, others fleeing, the leaders sneer, twisting to panic as feds swarmed, Tamara's off-book team striking back. Zeke lay there, chest heaving, the safe house a smoking husk, Grayson's arrest undone by this brutal encore. The night stretched, gunfire fading to shouts, then silence, the chopper's beams sweeping the wreckage. Zeke's eyes fluttered, pain, a tidal wave. But he clung to Tamara's face on that TV, her victory snatched by this ambush. The militia was Grayson's last card, a hate-fueled army striking from the shadows, and Zeke knew even as feds secured the scene, this wasn't the end. His leg bled through the cast, ribs cracked anew, but his resolve held, a steel core forged in decades of fight. Clarence slumped beside him, arm wrapped, and the nurse whispered, "You're still here," her voice a lifeline. Zeke nodded, the burner cold in his hand, the war raging on, Grayson's cuffs a hollow win against this unleashed beast. Ezekiel Marshall lay pinned behind the shed, the Memphis night thick with gunpowder and blood, his casted leg dragging as the militia's rifles spat fire, bullets chewing through the safe house's splintered walls. Clarence crouched beside him, arm bleeding through a makeshift wrap, his pipe clutched like a lifeline, while the nurse pressed Zeke's temple, her hands slick with red, the gauze soaked from his reopened wounds. The militia's headlights blazed, their leader barking, "Finish him!" As feds swarmed from the chopper, their shouts a chaotic roar over the gunfire. Zeke's chest heaved, ribs cracked, pain a white-hot storm, but his mind sharpened, decades of survival kicking in. He scanned the yard, spotting the safe house's dangling porch light, its cord swaying in the blast's wake, and a plan sparked, desperate but clear. "The lights," he rasped, pointing, and Clarence followed his gaze, nodding once. The janitor lunged, dodging a bullet that grazed his shoulder, and seized a rock, hurling it at the cord. It snapped, wires sparking, and Zeke grabbed the nurse's arm. "Now!" She yanked him up, half carrying him, as Clarence kicked the live wire into the militia's path, sparks flaring bright. The leader screamed, blinded, his rifle swinging, wild, and the feds seized the moment, charging in, their boots pounding as shots rang out. Zeke stumbled, the nurse hauling him through the yard, grass slick under his slippers, and they ducked behind a rusted car, its frame pocked with holes. The militia faltered, light-seared eyes blinking, and feds tackled them, cuffs snapping, the leader's scar twisting as he thrashed, roaring, "For Vic!" until a baton cracked his skull, silencing him. Zeke peered out, breath shallow, as the chopper's beam swept the scene, illuminating Grayson's loyalists sprawled in the dirt, rifles scattered, blood pooling under the leader's limp form. Sirens wailed closer, police finally joining, and Tamara's voice cut through, sharp on a megaphone from the chopper's edge. "Victor Grayson, you're done!" she shouted, descending on a rope, suit smudged with soot, her team dragging. The ex-sergeant from a van, his buzz cut stark as they shoved him to his knees. He ranted, spit flying, "Protecting order, you'll see." But the feds ignored him, wrists bound tight, his militia crushed, his empire ash. Zeke watched, a grim satisfaction blooming through the pain, Tamara's eyes finding his across the chaos, a nod passing between them, unspoken but ironclad. The nurse eased him against the car, checking his pulse, her fingers steady despite the blood on her scrubs, and Clarence slumped nearby, panting, his pipe dropped in the grass. "You're a madman," he muttered, and Zeke chuckled, rough and raw. "Takes one." The feds secured the scene, militia remnants hauled off, their truck smoking wrecks, and Tamara strode over, dropping beside him, her hand gripping his. "It's over," she said, voice firm, and he nodded, the weight of days lifting. Grayson's rants fading as cops swarmed, the chopper's thrum, a victory hum. She stood, addressing a news crew that rolled up, cameras flashing. "Federal overhaul's coming," she vowed, her tone a blade. "No more Graysons, we're tearing this out root and stem." Zeke smiled, faint but real, exhaustion tugging as the nurse wheeled a stretcher over, medics lifting him onto it, the cool fabric a balm against his battered skin. The safe house smouldered, a husk of splintered wood and glass, but he'd slipped its jaws, Grayson's last stand broken by wits and wire. Tamara followed as they rolled him to an ambulance, her presence a shield, and he let his eyes close, the stretcher's jolt fading, painkillers from a medic's needle softening the edges. The crowd dispersed, feds barking orders, and he drifted. Thinking of the porch, the tea, the life burned away, but this win, this moment, a coal glowing in the dark. Grayson was caught, his hate caged, and Zeke exhaled, the fight's end a whisper on his lips. That whisper snapped as a crack split the air, a sniper bullet grazing his arm, blood blooming through the bandage as he jolted awake, the ambulance. Doors still open, chaos erupting anew. Tamara spun, shouting, "Shooter!" and feds scattered, guns up, the chopper's light sweeping wild. Clarence ducked, the nurse diving beside Zeke, her hands pressing the wound, red seeping fast. "Stay down," she hissed, and Zeke gritted his teeth, pain flaring fresh, the graze a shallow burn but a loud warning. The shot came from the shadows, a rooftop beyond the yard, and feds fired back, muzzle flashes lighting the night, but the sniper vanished, a ghost in the dark. "Grayson's deputy," Tamara growled, kneeling beside him, her phone out, calling her team. "Still free, still." "Fighting." Zeke's arm throbbed, blood trickling onto the stretcher, but he met her gaze, voice steady despite the sting. "He's not done," he said, and she nodded, jaw tight, her vow of overhaul now a war cry against this lingering venom. The medics slammed the doors, engine roaring as they sped off, the safe house's wreckage shrinking, feds combing the scene for the shooter. Clarence stayed behind, waving off help, his pipe reclaimed, a soldier to the end, while the nurse bandaged Zeke's arm, her hands shaking now. The snipers strike a gut punch after victory. "You're still here," she said, echoing the hospital, and he nodded, resolve hardening, the graze a scar to carry, not a defeat. The ambulance jostled, sirens piercing the night, and Zeke lay back, the city blurring past. Tamara's voice, on the phone, a steady hum beside him. "We'll find him," she said, not to him but her team, her tone of vow, and he knew she meant it, her reinstatement a blade she'd wield to the end. Grayson's rant echoed in his skull. Protecting. Order. A delusion shattered by cuffs, but this deputy, this sniper, was the real threat now, a splinter of hate unbroken by the reckoning. Zeke's ribs ached, leg numb, arm stinging, but he clung to the fight, the stretcher a battlefield, not a grave. The hospital loomed again, doors banging wide, and they wheeled him in, Tamara at his side, the sniper's graze a promise of more to come. A war not won but raging on. The ward buzzed, nurses rushing, machines beeping as they hooked him up, fluids dripping, painkillers dulling the edges once more. Tamara stood guard, phone to her ear, her team hunting the deputy, the night's chaos a storm she'd tame. Zeke watched her, pride cutting through the haze, her strength his legacy, and closed his eyes, the graze a burn he'd bear, a mark, of survival. Grayson was down, his militia cracked, but this deputy lurked, a shadow cast by a fallen king, and Zeke knew, even as sleep pulled, this was a pause, not peace. The hospital's hum wrapped him, the stretcher's jolt fading, and he rested, ready for the next blow. The reckoning a step, not the summit. Ezekiel Marshall eased into a wicker chair on the porch of a modest suburban home, 30 miles outside Memphis, the late August sun casting long shadows across a lawn still patchy from his arrival weeks ago. The air was thick with honeysuckle, a far cry from the smoke and blood of the safe house, and his casted leg rested on a stool, ribs taped but healing, the sniper's graze on his arm now a pink scar beneath a loose sleeve. Tamara had moved him here, a quiet refuge with her family. Her husband grilling in the backyard, her kids' laughter drifting from a swing set. The hospital's sterile hum was a memory, replaced by crickets and the rustle of leaves, and Zeke sipped lemonade, the glass sweating in his grip, a fragile piece settling over him like dust after a storm. His slippers were gone, traded for sneakers, but the ache in his bones lingered, a quiet echo of the war he'd fought. The TV inside flickered, Volume low, news anchors dissecting the latest. Victor Grayson convicted on all counts: assault, arson, fraud, life without parole. Footage rolled, the ex-sergeant in an orange jumpsuit, buzz cut stark as cuffs clinked, his scowl unrepentant even in defeat. Protests had reshaped Memphis, new policies rolling out, Tamara's federal overhaul a hammer smashing the old guard, and Zeke watched, a faint nod his only tribute to the win. Grayson's militia had crumbled, most caught or scattered, the deputies. Sniper shot a fleeting scare, or so he thought. He'd testified via video, voice steady despite the pain, sealing Grayson's fate. And now here he was, retired from the fight, the world quieter, safer, or so it seemed. Tamara stepped out, her suit swapped for jeans, and sank beside him, her smile soft. "You earned this," she said, and he chuckled, rough but warm. "We did." Days blurred into routine, the suburban calm a balm he hadn't known he craved. He started a garden out back, hands in the dirt, planting tomatoes and peppers, the soil cool against his palms, a reclaiming of what fire had stolen. His knee protested, but he worked slow, the kids helping, their small fingers eager, and he taught them tricks his father had passed down, the cycle unbroken. The news faded to background noise. Grayson's name a ghost, and Zeke let it go. The porch his new kingdom, lemonade his tea, the swing set's creak a song of peace. Tamara's husband Marcus grilled ribs on Sundays, the smoke sweet, and Zeke sat with them, plate heavy, the taste a tether to normalcy. He'd lost his home, his quiet life, but this was enough, a victory carved from ash. One evening, as dusk painted the sky purple, Zeke shuffled to the shed, a rickety thing Marcus had built, tools rusting inside. He grabbed a hoe, planning tomorrow's rose, when a crackle stopped him cold, a static hiss from a corner shelf. He turned, brow furrowing, and spotted a radio, old and dusty, its antenna bent, buzzing to life unplugged. "This ain't over, old man," a voice rasped, low and venomous, and Zeke's heart slammed, the deputy's tone unmistakable, the sniper's shadow reborn. He dropped the hoe, the clatter sharp, and grabbed the radio, its plastic warm despite the chill in his spine, the signal fading to static, then silence. He stood, breath shallow, staring at the device, its threat a blade through the calm, Grayson's ghost striking from beyond bars. Tamara's phone rang inside, her voice rising, and Zeke limped back, radio clutched, the porch's peace shattered. She met him at the door, face pale, her call ending as she gripped the frame. "Case files on you, Dad. Gone from federal servers," she said, voice tight, and he held up the radio, its weight a bomb. "He's out there," he said, and she cursed, snatching it, dialing her team, her overhaul tested by this new breach. "Grayson's deputy," she muttered, pacing, and Zeke sank into the chair, lemonade forgotten, the garden's promise souring. The kids' laughter faded, Marcus ushering them in, and the night pressed close, the suburban refuge a thin veil against this lurking hate. News broke hours later, the TV blaring as Tamara flipped it on. Grayson convicted, but questions linger. Key. Evidence missing. Anchors speculated, pundits raged, and Zeke watched, the deputy's voice looping in his skull, a vow from the shadows. He pictured the warehouse from Tamara's arrest, a fleeting clip weeks back, men training in the dark. Rifles gleaming, his photo pinned to a wall, a hate group birthed from Grayson's fall. "They're organized," he said, and Tamara nodded, phone to her ear, her team tracing the breach, the radio signal a dead end so far. "We'll find him," she vowed. But Zeke saw the strain, her reinstatement a shield now pierced, the overhaul a war unfinished. He stayed up, the porch dark, crickets silent, the radio on the table like a loaded gun. Marcus sat with him, quiet, a beer in hand, and Tamara worked inside, her voice a steady hum through the screen door. The garden waited, tomatoes unripe. A dream paused, and Zeke's hands clenched, the graze on his arm itching, a reminder of how close the deputy had come. Grayson's life sentence was iron, but this splinter, this shadow, wielded his hate like a torch, burning still. Dawn crept, in grey and heavy, and Zeke stood limping to the shed, locking the radio inside, its threat caged but alive. He wouldn't run, wouldn't hide, not after all this. But peace was a lie, the suburban calm a mask for a war reignited. Tamara emerged, coffee in hand, her eyes red but fierce. "We're digging," she said, setting the mug down, steam curling in the cool air. "He's not alone, that group's real." Zeke nodded, sipping, the bitterness sharp, matching the knot in his chest. "I'll be ready," he said, and she squeezed his shoulder, her touch a vow. The kids peeked out, hesitant, and he waved them over, their small hands in his, a tether to fight for. The news droned, protests fading, the world moving on, but Zeke knew better. The deputy's rasp, a promise etched in static, the missing files, a noose tightening slow. He'd won the battle, Grayson's career dead, but the war stretched on, a shadow cast long and dark. The day unfolded, quiet but charged, Marcus mowing the lawn, Tamara on calls, and Zeke back in the garden, dirt under his nails, planting despite the dread. Each seed was defiance, a root against the deputy's fire, and he worked, sweat beading, the kids giggling as they watered, oblivious to the storm. The radio stayed locked, its voice silenced but not dead, and Zeke paused, hoe in, hand staring at the horizon, the suburban sprawl a fragile shield. Grayson was gone, his cuffs a victory, but this new foe, this hate group trained in the dark, rifles ready, was a beast unborn. His photo their target, his life their prize. Tamara joined him, dusk falling, and they stood, the garden a small stand against the chaos, her overhaul a war cry yet to win. He toasted that night, lemonade raised with Tamara and Marcus, the kids asleep, a moment of calm before the plunge. "To justice," he said, glass clinking, and they drank, the sweetness hollow, the deputy's threat a spectre at the table. The TV flickered off, silence settling, but Zeke's eyes stayed sharp. The porch, his watchpost, the garden, his ground. Grayson's end was real, his career ash, but this twist, this shadow, promised a fight beyond the bars, a war Tamara's overhaul might not crush. He slept light, the radio's hiss in his dreams, the suburban peace a thin skin over a wound. Still bleeding, the story closed but the battle open, a man unbroken facing a darkness unbowed. The saga of Ezekiel Zeke Marshall offers profound lessons about resilience, systemic injustice, and the power of truth in the face of unrelenting hate. First, Zeke's story teaches us that endurance isn't just physical, it's a fire. In the soul, forged through decades of survival against odds stacked high. From the porch shove to the sniper's graze, he stood tall, proving age and injury can't dim a spirit determined to fight. Second, it exposes the deep roots of racism in systems meant to protect, where a single cop's vendetta can ignite mobs, burn homes, and twist justice into a weapon. Grayson's unchecked power reveals how fragile fairness is when hate wears a badge. Third, the tale underscores the strength of community and family, Tamara's unwavering support, Ray's loyalty, the nurse's courage, and even Clarence's grit turn strangers into allies, showing that collective resistance can crack even the toughest lies. Finally, it warns that victory is rarely final. Grayson's conviction didn't end the war, as the deputy's shadow reminds us that hate adapts, lurking in the dark, ready to strike again. Truth can win battles, but the fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. So, what's your takeaway? Drop a comment below if Zeke's stand inspires you to speak up. Hit that like button if you're fired up by this clash with corruption, and subscribe if you want more stories of grit and justice. Share this with someone who needs to see it, because change starts when we refuse to look away. Thanks for joining this journey. Here's to courage that outlasts the storm and a future where no one faces this alone.